you just want to introduce yourself for the group?
My name is Karina. I am the sole recruiter at Nova Credit.
Great. And to start, can you tell me a little bit about you and your career progression? So how did you get started in recruiting, and then briefly what led you to your current role?
So I think like most people that I've met, recruiting sort of falls on someone's lap. And the way that it worked for me is when I was in college and looking for my next opportunity, an internship with Genentech actually opened up within their university recruiting team. And I decided to take that. And it was a bit of project management and doing a lot of the fun, like summer events that interns will experience. And then I slowly made my way over into actually doing some of the recruiting for the research and development functions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from there, I was definitely curious to go beyond university recruiting, and so decided to take an opportunity with a startup. What was most exciting was really around, they let me know that it was going to be very much a blank canvas. So I get to build the recruiting process. I get to run recruiting how I see fit. And I think that was a great opportunity for me to just get creative and really kind of understand the strategic side of recruiting.
That's great. And tell me a little bit more about your role. So, like, what are your core responsibilities? I'm sure I know in a startup things change like every couple of weeks even, but I'm curious to get a sense of what your role looks like.
So a big chunk of it is the actual recruiting. And obviously folks will learn like there's different things. So like there's the recruiting coordination, the sourcing, and then the actual recruiting. So being the sole person within the recruiting function, I get to cover all of that. And depending on the quarter, there's usually like a theme to it. So there's a quarter where I can be very much focused on hiring engineering talent, a quarter where it's more non-tech talent. So that's a big focus. I would say the second piece is really around the actual like operations and building out the process. So really understanding, we have what we call a recruiting cookbook, which is like the guidelines for how we approach recruiting.
I love
So
that.
getting to build that out, understanding and helping hiring managers understand how to best actually like search for a certain candidate. So building out templates that allow them to think about, okay, what type of candidate do I actually really need? And really kind of hashing out those details. And then the last piece, for me specifically, and because our company is still fairly small and we do want to do a huge push on diversity, it's also leading some of the diversity components and understanding, okay, how can we go beyond the more traditional places of sourcing and really continue to foster relationships with diverse talent and being able to attract them and bring them on.
Great. And how many people are at your company?
Currently, we are at 60 people.
Okay. And what do you think are the core competencies that make somebody successful in a role like yours? And I'm curious about both hard skills and soft skills.
I'll start with soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an introvert. And so my actual first assumption was that you had to be an extrovert to be able to recruit and have high energy. But I found that for me, the introverted piece had work really around like building connections and one-on-one. So usually talking with one candidate at a time and really being able to connect with them. And so having that genuine care for each person that you meet and approaching them with curiosity and understanding that this is potentially like a big piece of their life that you can impact. So that passion for that space. And then the second one, communication is extremely important. I'm continuing to learn that as I evolve in my role. So, how often you communicate with your hiring managers, even with your own candidates, or how do you communicate with the rest of the company to ensure that everyone feels like they have a hand in recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in Yeah, I would say I'm not sure whether time management falls into the more hard skills or soft skills, but
Yeah.
being the sole recruiter, that one is definitely really important, and understanding really how to prioritize your roles and your time to ensure that you're not necessarily dropping the ball on candidates, and that you're also kind of meeting for me, really building out like the foundations of recruiting at the company and ensuring that although that can easily be placed on the back burner, that it's not, so that everyone's up to date on understanding how to best interview and ensure that they're empowered from within the company as interviewers.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful. And that's such great insight around it's like you're wearing so many hats at the startup. So I can imagine that like throughout the day, you have to almost change what role you're in.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
correct.
How is success measured for you in this role? Like what metrics are you tracking by week or by month or even by quarter?
For me specifically, the biggest one is really tied to, are you meeting your goals in terms of like the hires that you need to make.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still fairly small. We don't necessarily open like tons of roles per quarter. But a big piece is really around like, did you make the 5 hires, or out of the 5 or 10 hires that you had to make for the quarter, did you at least make the most critical hires that could really impact the company? So that's one piece. I think what's been really neat, because we're still fairly small, we really get to, between my manager and I get to
Mm-hmm.
set what those goals and what success looks like every quarter. So it could be really that this quarter, what we're seeing is incredibly important is, let's say we have a third of the workforce is new and none of them have done any interview training.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal of this quarter is very much being able to ensure that everyone feels trained and empowered to interview. And so then the goals are set on a quarterly basis and really measured out that way.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And who's your manager? What role are they in?
Good. So as of today, it has changed, but I was reporting directly to the co-founder and chief operating officer. And as of today, we hired a head of people. So as we're
Oh,
growing and maturing at
congrats.
a company, thank you. We're bringing in leadership. So now I will report directly to the head of people.
Great. And are there any other roles at the company that you work really closely with besides
Um,
your interviewers and hiring managers, obviously?
I will say those are the people I can think of
Yeah.
most. And I will say what's really cool about starting at a smaller company is that really a lot of my hiring managers are leadership.
Hmm.
And so I've been incredibly lucky to really like work with our head of engineering, our head of product, like our head of credit risk, and really just work and kind of better understand how to work with leadership and learn from them, because they're incredibly talented individuals.
Cool. What do you like most about your role, and what do you find to be the most challenging about it?
Mm. I think what I like most, there's two, I would say there's two things. One, I think, and this is something anyone, I think once they make their first hire, they'll experience that rush of like, you did it, like somehow you convinced, obviously not by yourself, but like you got someone to change the trajectory of their career, right? And I think that one's just always a fun one of like chasing someone and being able to close a candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the second piece for me is being a first generation Latina. The giving back piece has always been huge, and it's always a question that I make to myself, like, am I doing the most that I can be doing to really give back to the community, or to give back in some sort of way. And what I found with recruiting, especially in the role that I'm in, is I am really get to decide, who we partner with and how we approach the larger talent pool. And so a big piece for me is, okay, I understand that there are these underserved communities, and I'm able to leverage resources to ensure that they are, that we're meeting with them and that we're giving them opportunities. So really being at the table where the decisions happen
Mm-hmm.
or are made, to be able to bring and open the doors for underrepresented talent, that's really rewarding.
That's so cool. Is there anything you find really challenging about it, or that you think you're still learning how to do that's hard?
Well, there's a few, but like similar on the kind of flip side of when you do close someone, when you lose someone,
Yeah.
a candidate decides not to go with you. Um, I've still continued to take it very personal, and it's hard not to sometimes, just because you invest a lot of your time and energy in getting to know a person. Um, but I would say beyond that, kind of the emotional piece is really, um, there are certain lessons that you will learn with like mistakes, and so for me it's challenging sometimes to try to like um, really um, I guess it's not necessarily challenging, but I sometimes regret, like, when I'm further in my career, I was like, oh, I wish I would have known this with X candidate like a
Hmm.
year ago. And so obviously, like, being patient with myself, but understanding that like mistakes will happen, and you just have to take the learnings and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. My on my old team, we used to have a saying that was DGA, don't get attached
Yeah,
to the candidates. So like, even if you really want this candidate to join, like, don't get too attached because like they haven't made their decision yet.
yeah.
To your second point, I'm curious, like, so for our students, they could be recent graduates or they could have had a bunch of career experience, but they're career changing. Do you have any advice for people who are just starting out their careers in recruiting, things that you wish you had known maybe when you were starting out, some of those lessons learned?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and I just had a conversation actually with like this amazing recruiter, and she reminded me of it again, which is over communicate. And I tend to be the person that if you give me a task, I'll just run with it and like we'll remember to check in once there's the final product. And I don't think people are necessarily a fan of that, right? Like people like to know what's happening at every stage, both your candidate and your hiring manager, right? And so I think it's a nerve-wracking process, I think, for everyone involved, for the candidate, obviously, because it's a new job that they're trying to find, and for the hiring managers, because, you know, this is a piece that this person that joins will really help them take the company to the next level. And so being able to over communicate and always let everyone know what's happening at each point of the process and being very transparent, I think it's like the biggest piece of advice that even I wish I would have known earlier in my career, to just, even if it's like a weekly update email to your hiring manager, like send it over, even if they know the information, just to ensure they have it in writing. But over
Absolutely.
communicate for sure.
Great. That's great advice. I feel like I'm constantly reminding myself of that every role I'm in, every step of the way. Um, okay, I think those are my main questions. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wish I had, or anything else that you want to share with students going through the program?
Yeah, I think the last piece I would share, especially with this is folks entering like very junior roles, um, I have found this happening to myself. I can easily get intimidated,
Hmm.
um, either by like the actual role itself, which is when I first started, it was an engineering role, and I had no idea, like no engineering background, no idea on what half of the things people were saying, and so I remember easily getting intimidating and not wanting to look dumb in front of the engineers, or say something that was maybe not correct. And then also sometimes when you're on candidate calls, for some reason, like a VP of X company wanted to join and you're interviewing them. And again, it's sometimes nerve wracking when you're early in your career, like having to deal with a lot more senior people. Um, and I would say at the end of the day, like they're just people. It's just a conversation, but I think sometimes the titles and the like complexity of a role can get in the way. But either way, if it's with a hiring manager, with your actual team, like ask the questions, like it'll save you a lot of time. And like in case you're trying to like learn it on your own, like your team is there to help. They want you to be successful because your success is definitely their success. And with candidates, honestly, like if someone is mean because they're a VP and they feel like they shouldn't be talking to you, like that's a clear decision for you. Like no one who you talk to, regardless of their like status or experience, should ever be rude to you. So just being open to having a conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. Do you have any other tips for working with engineers? If you're going to be a technical recruiter or working closely with engineers, like anything, any other advice you have about how you figured out how to do that well?
Really like befriend one or two engineers to the point where like you can ask them absolutely anything and you feel like this is your go-to like person or like people, um, and that will make your life so much easier, because I think sometimes having kind of an in within like the engineering team, whether it's understanding projects or challenges or just like getting to know the language they speak, is incredibly helpful.
That is great. Perfect.